This meeting is being recorded.
Good evening, Endo Summit Live, and welcome to usually my favorite night in the Endo Summit Live series. Tonight is Advocates Night, where people with the disease discuss the disease, and let's just say there are no filters here, which I think is very important for this group. Joining us in no particular order is Heather Guidon from the Center for Endometriosis Care. Heather, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Heather Guidon from the Center for Endometriosis Care. Here I am. My favorite night also.
My favorite night. And also joining us just a few days before she defends her thesis is Eileen Hawaka. Eileen, can you introduce yourself and tell everybody what that thesis is? Because we want to send good juju your way.
Yes, I'm Eileen. I am in Canada, in Montreal. One of the many Canadians who has had to leave the country to get endometriosis care. And I just wrote a whole dissertation on endometriosis and social media use, especially how we dismiss social media use, but how it's become a pretty critical tool for a lot of people with endometriosis, especially if they aren't receiving care. So I talk a lot about that.
Show of hands, how many Canadians do we have? Yeah. Did you all have to leave for care?
I had to leave my province. So I'm in Quebec, which is the French speaking province. And I had to go to Ontario and pay out of pocket because I couldn't find care here.
And Tracy, did you have to leave your province?
No, I just had to wait 24 years. No, I actually moved to another province from Quebec to Ontario, and that's when I finally got someone to pay attention to me.
Oh boy. Okay, so continuing with the introductions, Christina Kasparian is here. Christina, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi. So I'm a scientist by training, but after my PhD, I left academia to start my own business. And that's really when I think I started to better manage my endometriosis, and I was able to get the care that I, like Tracy, had waited almost 24 years for. I'm a writer, so I write a lot about endometriosis from a science-based perspective, but also in terms of creative writing. And I write a lot about identity as a whole and how to thrive and how to live your best life, even when you're not feeling your best.
Your writing is just amazing. It speaks to me. I know it speaks to everybody, but it speaks to me too. Also joining us is Amy Corfelli. Amy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Corfelli. My pronouns are she, her. I am an endometriosis advocate. So I have a podcast about endometriosis. It's like a chat conversation with my best friend. And, we try to break down like endometriosis facts and science in a fun way, and also like break down stigma and break down taboos around having a disease that can affect, all these different bodily functions that we have that unfortunately in society are still wrongly deemed as taboo, like things like incontinence or menstruation. So it's great to be here.
Love the podcast. I love to listen to podcasts when I walk. And so yours is on the list. The ones that I listen to. Also joining us from Extra Pelvic Not Rare, Wendy Bingham. Wendy, can you introduce yourself?
You're on mute, Wendy.
Sorry, I'm multitasking too much lately. I wonder why.
Year 3.
Yeah, Sally already introduced me. It's Wendy from Extra Pelvic Not Rare. So there you have it.
We're so happy to have you. And also joining us, a new face to the Endometriosis Summit is Tracy Lindman. Tracy has a book coming out 5 days, 6 days?
Something like that, about a week.
Yeah, do you want to tell everybody a little bit about your book? Because it's a must read. I mean, Amy has a book also a must read, but your book a must read as well. We will have at the Endometriosis Summit people selling books there. So if you're a reader, it's a good place to go.
Yeah. So I'm new to the summit, not new to endo, sadly. I'm from Montreal originally. I currently live in Western Quebec. I'm a journalist. I've been a journalist for a very long time, and I never really wrote about health or my own situation. And I just couldn't ignore this story of all these people being ignored and gaslit for having this condition that is so common, it's ridiculous. And so that kind of was what led me to write Bleed in the first place. And
Yes.
it's coming out March 21st.
Yeah, so throughout the night, we're going to keep putting links in the chat for people to see. And then that's great. The mic is picking that up. So it's not been a great day here. So anyway, let's talk about endometriosis because that's what we do. Eileen, can you talk a little bit about how gaslighting might affect somebody with endometriosis? And then we'll talk to Heather about maybe why that happens.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean, we can trace patient blaming with endometriosis back to like ancient Egypt, basically. This has been going on for ages around endometriosis and around pelvic pain. And the impacts of that are astronomical. It means that like 1 in 10 people are lost for up to, I think the worldwide average to get care is 7.5 years. And that has emotional effects, that has physical effects. That means that a lot of people don't even know like what's going on in their body. And the sort of ways that we patient blame over time change. You know, it started with like you're having too much intercourse, or you're not saying the right things as a woman or a femme presenting person. And then it sort of transitions into you're not having children soon enough, or you're working instead of staying home. And now we see it in, you know, you're the wrong kind of woman, or you're on social media too much, or you're thinking too much about your pain. So it's just interesting to follow how this narrative keeps going from times and times on into infinity.
Yes, and actually, this is the first year during the town meeting, we'll have a sociologist sort of track why that this concept that menstruation is dirty, and so therefore people with endometriosis are. That'll be really interesting to hear. Heather, why do you think people with endometriosis are so minimized?
Where should we start?
I know.
Well, I wrote about this, so you can just go read the book, but no, I mean, there's so many intersectional layers. You know, endometriosis predominantly affects cis women, of course, which is not to exclude transgender and gender diverse folks, but they are also marginalized and gaslit. You know, the links to hysteria are incredibly strong. We may not call it hysteria anymore. Now we call it catastrophizing, but it's you know, leopard hasn't changed its spots, right? There's the whole menstrual component, which is still stigmatized. So much taboo still surrounds it. And, you know, you're dealing with things like pelvic pain or GI issues or bladder issues, which are all also still considered, you know, very taboo. So there's all of these isolating layers that are piled on top of the pain. You know, and we're also taught not to complain. You know, it's your lot in life, suck it up. It's supposed to be this way. You know, a lot of that is generational. You know, if parents or grandparents sort of adopted that, then it's kind of passed down. But there's so many different intersectional issues associated specifically with endometriosis. I mean, even by virtue of you know, its very origins, you know, the wandering womb, you know, there's this notion and this belief that, you know, the womb was Pandora's box, or more aptly, Pandora's jar, and, you know, spewed forth all of this hysteria and these evils in the form of menstruation. I mean, it would be comical if it didn't cost people their lives and livelihoods. and the fact that it's still going on today in some form or another. Maybe we're not hanging people or burning witches at the stake, but we are getting gaslit at physicians' offices. We are being treated as burdens or made to feel like burdens to those around us. Employers don't understand, doctors don't understand. So it's all of those things. It's everything, all of it. We haven't really, I don't think, moved past much of it. We've just sort of changed the way it looks.
Sorry, the princess is bothering me. So, yes, okay, the princess.
That's better. I've been waiting.
That she needed attention. Christina, I've read a whole bunch of stuff from you. I wonder, and we asked this multiple times at the summit, but I wonder if you want to share, what does endometriosis do to somebody's sense of self?
Oh my God. Well, I think everyone is different. And I think that everyone's experience with endometriosis might be felt in different ways based on their symptoms and their history. But I think it affects every facet of it could affect every facet of one's sense of self, because it not only affects our quality of life, but really our basic functioning, our relationships, our career abilities, our finances, everything. And when you're being told constantly that you just have to deal with something and you have nowhere to turn, then it becomes very isolating and very damaging. And I think that for me, that was one of the biggest challenges that I had to overcome, is trying to make sense of who I am with this challenge, but also who can I be if this is going to stick around for the rest of my life, and trying to find ways of coping and changing my lifestyle and my career around it. So this acceptance, I know Amy talks and writes a lot about acceptance, and trying to find a way to challenge the status quo, but also find a way to accept it and create a sense of self that can still be whole, even though you feel like you're grieving at the same time.
Amy, it's a perfect segue, really. It's perfect. So, Amy, how, what kind of advice do you have for someone trying to find their way through this diagnosis and not lose themselves?
Yeah, I think almost part of the process for many people is losing yourself, because it's, I think, really hard, as Christina said, I think due to the fact that endometriosis can and often does affect every single aspect of a person's life, everything from relationships to career to fertility to your independence, your dignity, everything. And I think in many cases, it's really hard not to lose your sense of self or lose your sense of identity. And then from there, I think we have to, as Christina said, try to refine ourselves with endometriosis, right? And I think part of that is something that's really hard, I think, is letting go of our old life, letting go of looking at the past, letting go of that person that we were pre-endometriosis. I mean, likely we're born with endometriosis, so we always have it, but I mean pre-symptoms, right? When the endometriosis wrecking ball just came in and shattered our lives and shattered our sense of self. I think there's no going back, right? There's only taking what we have now, which could be this feeling of brokenness, of a broken self, of a broken life around us, and trying to rebuild and trying to re-find a life that we feel is worth living every single day. And I think that's a really hard process. I think can be a really long process. I know that took me, a decade and a half before I could even start thinking about how to really be have acceptance and be more at peace, or, at least be more neutral and not be grieving and angry every single day. It took a decade and a half of feeling all those feelings, feeling that rage, feeling that heavy soul sadness before I was really able to move forward. So I guess my advice to anyone would be that, wherever you are right now is okay, right? Don't push yourself don't judge yourself. Don't guilt yourself into thinking, oh, I have to feel a different way. Like I shouldn't be so sad or I shouldn't be so angry. Maybe you can recognize, I don't want to be sad forever. I don't want to get stuck here. I need to figure out how to work through this, how to process, how to move forward. But let's not judge ourselves for wherever we are in this current moment.
Yeah, so important. I wonder, Tracy, what do you think? What shift do you think society would have to have for endometriosis to finally have its seat at the table?
Destroy capitalism? No. I mean, like there's so much that needs to change. I think specifically when it comes to endo, a lot of people tend to focus on the immediate actors around them that gaslight them, that treat them, that dismiss them, that discriminate against them. But we all have to remember that it is a very systemic problem. And it's not just based on the medical system, it's also social systems. It's based on the history of medicine. It's based on the history of misogyny in medicine. And so I feel as though, like, I don't know if I could even say I believe in reform of current practitioners, but I do think that, advocates like us, like all the people listening and like other people who will be at the Endo Summit, getting together and being mad about what's going on and what's happening to us and actually advocating at the political level, at the systemic level to start enacting these changes is what it will take. Because I mean, I always say this, but we never get anything that if we don't ask for it or if we don't demand it. And so like you've been doing with the Endo Summit, like you have to demand it, right? And as the more people that are starting to demand better treatment come along and feel more comfortable asserting themselves, I think that that's what will be the turning point.
Do you guys, we have some Canadians here. I don't know that everybody, I mean, certainly all of us here are aware of it. Do you want to explain a little bit about how care differs in Canada? We'll ask Tracy. And why. I don't know that demanding is ever going to work there. That's what I'm a little bit worried about, because the lists are so long. Do you want to explain how care is a little different there? We're not Canada bashing. It's just a different.
It's okay. We can Canada bash. I think all the Canadians here are fed up with the system. I mean, like, well, I think Eileen and I, we shared one doctor in Montreal, and she sucked. Like, she basically blackmailed me into getting an IUD before she would even consider talking about surgery. And I was like, I don't want to be on an IUD. I've been on the pill for many years. It made me feel crazy. I don't want to be on another hormonal birth control treatment. And she was like, well, I'm not going to talk to you until you do it. And she was a person presenting herself as an endo specialist. And in the end, she was also a person who delivered babies most of the time. And so it was just like, obviously you don't actually know what you're talking about. But yeah, like it was just awful. Like it took me so long to find her. Having to go back to my when I had a family doctor. For the longest time, I didn't even have a family doctor. There's a waiting list for that too. And so when I finally got one, I went back to that doctor probably 100 times, telling her, I'm in so much pain. This doesn't make sense. I don't know what's wrong with me. And she was like, well, whether or not we get you diagnosed, the treatment is the same, which is the birth control pill. So why don't we just not add to the burden of this overtaxed system and just assume that the pill will help you? And so that was what I was dealing with for many, many years until I finally.
Wait, let's pause there. Why don't we not add to the burden of this overtaxed system by treating a human? My other Canadian, Eileen, you also made a face. What do you think of that? Because so the human should give up because the system is broken. Eileen, what do you think about that? You also look like you've been through it.
Oh, I've been through it with the same doctor as well. But no, I think a big problem that we have in Canada is that I think socialized medicine is a great thing, if it works, but it doesn't work. And I think that's a thing that a lot of Canadians have a really hard time admitting, because we want to hang on to the idea that it works. But our healthcare system is in a state of like constant current collapse, and the pandemic has made it worse. And so that excuse that like Tracy just brought up, we can't do this because of the overburdened system, is the most common thing that I hear in endometriosis spaces. There's a lack of surgeons. There's a lack of surgeons who know how to do excision surgery. There's a lack of doctors, of GPs, of getting a referral. You get a referral, you wait 2 to 3 years for that referral to go through to a gynecologist. There's no chance to get care. And I think a lot of the doctors are frustrated, and I feel for a lot of them. And what can they do except turn to pharmaceuticals and hope that the birth control manages your symptoms and that it doesn't make you go crazy like it makes so many of us go crazy.
Given, and I see the hands up, but I do want to maybe ask this, given that the system is so taxed and people are thrown the birth control pills, which if the birth control pill works, good, that's great. But if it doesn't, I don't know. How do you think the debate about surgical diagnosis versus presumed diagnosis fits into all that? I don't know who wants to answer that. Yeah, Tracy, do you want to answer that? And then I see the hands, I promise.
Yeah. There is a small point that I wanted to build on what Eileen said, just very quickly, is that socialized medicine can be great if the government invests in it. We all pay in Canada incredible high taxes, and we are not getting the healthcare that we were promised in exchange for those taxes. So they've cut their investments and they've let it fail. It's not like a failure of the model. I think, anyway, that's my opinion. But in terms of diagnostics, I was actually diagnosed via ultrasound, the level 2 ultrasound. And it was because they could see it on my bowel with the ultrasound. And that led me down the path of actually getting excision surgery, which was what I wanted all along, right? And I wanted the hysterectomy too. I had adenomyosis as well. So I was like, well, finally, I'm getting the thing I wanted for so long. I think that the presumed diagnosis, like, is fine, maybe, if they're going to offer you something in exchange for it other than the birth control pill, maybe pelvic floor physio, for example, letting you even know that it exists. So many people don't know it exists. But I do know that a lot of people in the endo community really want answers. They want to know for sure what they have, and you can only achieve that through the surgical diagnosis, I think.
I think the danger of the presumed diagnosis is, and I'll take the lid off the box, that the research that supports that concept of presumed diagnosis really is motivated by the pharmaceutical companies that benefit from the person being handed the birth control pill to manage symptoms that we don't really know what they are. So I took the lid off the box. I'll let you all continue. But Wendy, you have your hand up.
I do. I wanted to give a little bit of an insight. We were talking about socialized medicine, and I think we have to keep it in the perspective of looking at healthcare in general, then looking at endometriosis. If you look at like socialized medicine, I spent a lot of time in England, and I actually did a lot of studying, and I worked within the system at the time that there was all NHS, and they were going through the battle of really long delays, huge lines that you were waiting for some of the simplest procedures. And that was at a time when I left school, graduated, I went back, and I was with my husband at the time. And I worked for a trust. And what was happening is that the trusts were forming and they were separating off. And yes, it meant private pay, but there are people that, does it jump the queues? It really depends on what resources they have. But what they found out is that it made a huge difference in the waiting lists. So in the UK, that system has been working, and it's amazing how much shorter the lines are within the NHS. Now you talk about a more complicated thing is a lot of people, when they're educated, that are in a socialized medical system, a lot of them, their education as they go through their trainings are free. And in the United States, we have a different pathway for that. You know, a lot of people are going to school, they're paying for their schooling, and it's a totally different setup. So you have to think about the educational training behind the doctors behind it. And it's geared towards wherever they're usually going to serve. So then you go to the endometriosis in particular training. Well, we know that there's deficiency everywhere, you know, regardless of where you went to school. So putting that to the side, when you talk about the socialized medicine, we do know some excisions in some countries that do take a small caseload that are using the socialized medicine, but they're also compensating by taking private cases to offset how much they're losing on NHS patients. So I just want to give a little perspective of that's how it's been working in England. They're kind of shifting to that. They have a lot of work to do, but the times are coming, and they have a population density that I know that in Canada you don't have, except in like Ontario, right? So a lot of yours is run by province.
At least 4 times the size.
It's
and
the size, but it's the population number.
But the other thing is, I can't exactly like hold up the NHS as the shining star, because I get DMs every single day from people who are struggling not only to find excision, but who are struggling to find nutritionists and mental health counselors and physical therapists. And and also we have to stop saying physical therapists, because now the OTs do it. We have to say pelvic health, and I suck at that.
But they don't have that density like they do in England. You have a real dense population in a small area, and Canada is enormous for the population that they have. So that's a real difficult thing that you guys have on your plate up there in Canada. So I just wish you well in going forward.
So the number one question I got, and we did Endo Summit Brazil, and I don't speak any Portuguese, so they didn't translate everything for me, but they kept asking me, every panel asked me the same question. And that was, what role does stress play in endometriosis? Or they would ask, does stress cause endometriosis? So which to me, I broke that down for them. You can only imagine what I said, but let's hear from you guys. Christina, how many times have you been told you're stressed, stop complaining? And also, I mean, do you think scientifically stress plays any role here?
Yeah, so as someone who began complaining in her teens, I was always on like a very ambitious academic track. So they would always ask me, especially during my PhD, what do you do for a living? Was the first question I was asked at every doctor's appointment. And then as soon as I said I was in grad school, then they would say, oh, you're anxious, you're stressed. And that was always the judgment. If it wasn't made in person, it was made in the clinical notes that I got later on. So I would always ask for the records, and then I would see patient dissatisfied or patient appears stressed or anxious. So I think that could be really a detrimental shortcut that a lot of physicians tend to take when they don't really know how to get to the bottom of the patient's symptoms, and it really is damaging. On the other side, I do think that, I mean, stress does affect our flight or fight responses. It affects our tension in our muscles, our pelvic floor tension. So I think that stress does have a role to play, but I don't think that it's fair to dismiss or diminish or belittle a patient's observations about their own body and their own symptoms and the links that they're making between things, and just ascribe it to stress and to other mental health conditions or anxiety. So yeah, I think that it does have a role to play, but I definitely don't think that it's fair to just label someone like that.
Heather, what you think? Let me formulate the question. I think that so many of us experience anxiety and depression as a result of the gaslighting, but how many are told that they have anxiety and depression and that's what's causing the pain? What burden do you think that is on a person?
Well, I think it's huge. I mean, not addressing for cause or consequence. I do think that we can absolutely all agree that any type of stress or emotional or mental health mechanisms, if you will, can absolutely accelerate pain, elevate pain. There's been even a couple studies talking about accelerating lesion growth as a result of stress and other sorts of associations. But I mean, it's insult to injury, right? So you are already in this really vulnerable place. There's already a huge power imbalance at the physician's office. It already takes a lot of courage for you to go there and talk about your symptoms, which you may be feeling very vulnerable about, or shy or embarrassed or what have you. And now you're going to put layers of gaslighting and dismissal and invalidation and trivialization on top of that. So of course, people with endometriosis are going to have, increased, I don't want to call it emotional issues, but certainly increased anxiety as a result. And all of that is very, very bad. I mean, it's all linked. You talk about the biopsychosocial model. That's all part and parcel. And a lot of it is coming at the doctor's office and from the healthcare provider's office and from those who are closest to us that are supposed to be the ones supporting us, right? So, I mean, it's definitely insult to injury. I'm not saying that one causes the other, but to say that there's no link would be, I think, disingenuous.
Eileen, did you find a link between anxiety and depression and the gaslight? I mean, I know that's not the conclusion of your work, but you did a lot of interviews. Did you see that link?
I think one of the really interesting things is that a lot of doctors, researchers as well, will say that going on social media to research your illness or to talk to other people with your illness will exacerbate your symptoms or will make you experience more pain. And if anything, the research that I did showed the opposite, and that people are going to those spaces because they've been dismissed for so long and because they're so isolated and lonely. And these are the places where they're actually finally finding care. And we shouldn't have to find our care on social media. We should be getting it at the doctor's office.
So one of my very first pelvic health classes, you have to go to training beyond PT school. They gave us a how-to. It's even in the manual. I could go back to Pelvic Health 1 and look in it. And it says, discourage patients from engaging in online support groups. How many of you have engaged in online support groups?
No, I'll do you one better. How about the surgeon who is paid by pharma to stand in a pharma-sponsored breakfast and say that patient-led advocacy and support is bad? How about that? That's gaslighting.
I mean, how about entire societies that are having sessions on how social media is bad? I mean, we could really go. I mean, the other thing is, how about patient groups that take money from pharma so that pharma can then seem like they support patient groups? Yeah. All right. So, I mean, the system is dirty. Do we all agree with that? Tracy, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention a quick thing that I found in my research is that Brazilian researchers and others have actually found that the more depressed or anxious you feel, the more sensitive you might be to pain. And the more sensitive to pain you are, the more pain you experience, the more anxious you feel about your pain. So I think, to Heather's point, there is a connection between the two, but I don't think it's necessarily a causation factor. I think it's just living with this disease is stressful. And therefore, it kind of gets rolled down a hill and makes it worse and worse every interaction you have with a gaslighting doctor.
And plus there's studies too on the so-called quote unquote endometriosis brain. They're seeing changes in the gray matter in people with endometriosis that they don't see in people who do not have the disease, particularly in cases where the pain is more severe, actual physical change. So, it's there. The link is there.
Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that, I think endometriosis, as we all are very well aware in our own lives, it can take a huge toll on our mental health. And I think that, there's a difference between someone actually taking account of our mental health, whether that be a doctor or like a loved one, and saying like, wow, like it is a really heavy burden to live with chronic pain every single day, or infertility or incontinence or XYZ, ABC, Q, PRS symptom. And, you know, how can I support you? Or like, how can I help you find joy in your life again? Like, do you need to see a mental health professional? And I think that is an approach that like most likely all of us, you know, could use and welcome, because we need more support with the emotional and mental toll that this disease takes on us. But unfortunately, that is really different from, you know, what the gaslighting, which is just like you go to the doctor, and as everyone has already stated, it's like, oh, are you under stress, honey? Right? Or you come home and your partner's like, oh, you seem anxious. Like, no wonder why you're in pain. And you're like, no, like these are conversations we should be having about my experience with endometriosis and how anxiety and depression and stress can play a role in the experience of how I experience my disease, how I experience my life as a person with this disease. But that's really different than the gaslighting that we face. Is just like being told that our symptoms are psychosomatic. So it's like, it's really frustrating. And you know, I know in my own case, I've like really been working in the past couple of years on like, I wouldn't even say like my stress response, but just on like my own mental health in general, right? Like, how can I live better with this disease? Like, how can I find joy in my life again? How can I find meaning in my life again? Like, how can this, you know, not take such a heavy burden on me? How can I find self-compassion? How can I change the way that I think about myself? And it's been really hard to, it was really hard to initiate that like journey into my mental health, because after being told so many times that, well, you have your symptoms because you're anxious, it's like I really had wanted to push away, like, no, I don't have anxiety. Like, no, like I'm not under stress, because it's like I personally got like so defensive, like, no, I don't feel like this because I'm under stress. Like have a lot of pain. And obviously that made me stressed, and maybe that exacerbated pain. It's just like a vicious, you know, snake biting its own tail. But the cause of all of this is not stress. And so it became really hard to like actually sit and be like, okay, how can I help my mental health as a person with this disease?
So important. Wendy, you had something to say? With a mic on?
Oh, I like to keep myself quiet. No, we're talking about the mental health aspect of having endometriosis. I think if we were to look at it as just similar to other chronic illnesses, we do know endometriosis has multiple genes involved. And we also know that when you are ill, we do know the biome of our gut has something to do with it. We have a lot of factors, our own personal lives that go on, and there are things that trigger and set us up to have anxiety and depression alongside the condition. When you don't feel well, it changes your neurotransmitters, and that's part of having a condition. And so I think it's a responsibility of a physician to recognize the difference between developing anxiety and depression because of all the factors of your environment, everything that's going on along living with the disease, and the reactive anxiety and depression that you get from further gaslighting, from the dismissal, and from the not knowing. And I think doctors are having a hard time with that. And I see, not just with myself, now I have a great doctor. I walk in the door and he listens to me and he doesn't open his mouth and say anything, but I will guarantee how many people here on our panel and are listening right now walk in and have had at least one time where a doctor, when you say something and the first thing out is a dismissal. And then after they dismissed you and kind of put you in your place, then they sit down and listen to you. And then they'll say, oh yeah, we can look into that. But it's after they have already reacted and given an opinion, a response, an actual outwardly frustration, whatever it is that is really unprofessional, and set you up to go hiding in a corner and not really want to talk about your disease. And this is something that's happening behind doors. And that's something that really bothers me. But I think we do have to recognize that there is an anxiety and depression that's associated with the condition, because it could be genetics, like we said, all the factors. But then there's also the other aspect that the gaslighting and everything throws on top of it. And so physicians and whoever is working with you in your healthcare team need to be aware of that, acknowledge that, and clarify it with the patient as well. That, hey, if you might have some anxiety, depression, it's okay. And also realize that they need to not contribute to it. Anyway, I'm muting myself again.
So getting back to, this is our disease and we have to fight for change to make it happen. I think like in some ways, it's becoming known that, patient advocates are moving the conversation forward, but also it's becoming known by industry that patient, claiming they're of the patient moves things forward in a different way. Let's talk about what I call weaponizing the patient voice. Tracy, do you understand what I'm talking about?
I think I'm following you, kind of like using it against the patient.
Right.
Maybe
what do you think about companies that I know Heather has her own thoughts? We'll defer to you in a minute. What do you think about companies wanting to be seen like they're of the people, but using the voice of the patient almost against the patient?
I feel like you have an example in mind that you're just not coming right.
I don't. I mean, I could have 50 examples of it.
Yeah.
I could have, we all remember a few years ago, there was that ad, particularly if you were up late at night in pain, and it was like a patient going to their doctor in pain and saying all the right things. Well, all the right things came from, patient groups who had conversations with with industry, and that's just one example. Or another example could be like, so-and-so owns such this organization. And then she's quoted 50 times by this particular pharmaceutical company. There's a million examples.
Yeah, I think like a lot of the pharmaceutical companies kind of frame drugs as like, this will help you get your life back. Like they're talking directly to patients about what their drug will help them accomplish, or they're talking to doctors about like, this will help your patients get their lives back. But they don't talk seriously about like how dramatic their drugs effects can be on a person's mental health, on their bones, on their bodies, on their hormones, on their, all different parts of the, the mind and the body. And I feel as though, like, especially, does everyone know what open payments is? No, maybe.
Go ahead, explain.
Yeah, open payments.
We know these things, but
yeah, like open payments is this government-run database of all the money that doctors and institutions get from big pharma. And last year they gave, in the US alone, $10 billion. And if you look at the data, there's like hundreds of thousands of entries in this database. But if you look at the data, gynecology is one of the biggest to get money. And if you drill down even further, the biggest funder is usually AbbVie, which makes Lupron, Orilissa, and Mirena, and a lot of birth control pills. And so, yeah, like we see them all the time in, pamphlets and online and that kind of thing, talking directly to people like us. But do they really have our best interests at heart, or are they just out to make a buck? Like it feels really disingenuous when you actually understand like where they're coming from and how they're funding your doctor and, other doctors to prescribe certain medications to you that may actually do more harm than good.
Yeah, that in itself, we could have 17 hours on. I think, I think patients are angry and they don't really realize how involved it is. How does, in Canada, Christina, you have whole patient-run organizations that are very, look, and everybody needs to make a living. I'm not, how might it affect a patient organization to be so connected to pharma? You may not want to answer that. We'll see.
I don't know. Maybe Eileen knows better, because I'm not actually sure about the patient organizations and how they're connected to pharma. So I won't pronounce myself on something that I'm not completely sure about. If someone else in Canada wants to take up that question, I'd be happy to give you the floor.
Tracy, Eileen?
I think Eileen knows the most out of all of us.
Yeah.
That makes me sound like the harbinger of secrets.
Well, we're harbinging. I'll harbinge the secret. You just explain it without, being too detailed, without divulging.
I think it's hard when it's hard to know the interests of any organization when there's potentially pharmaceutical influence or other influence coming from other places. I think like ideally the best chance we have with endometriosis is when things are patient-led, because and I just went through this recently, when as soon as you have other people involved, whether they're coming in from companies or whether they're doctors, even the greatest doctors around, the people with the most power instantly take up the most space and they get the most say, and patients disappear really, really quickly. Whether that's a panel, whether that's an organization, whether that's policy making, and we just have to be really careful of that, because endometriosis patients have been invisibilized for so long, and now we're like punching through the walls to try and get out, and I just want us to be able to like actually burst through, but that means like really working together as much as we can.
I think lots to say. So the endometriosis communities, and I think it's because the people have been burnt by MDs for so long, we're not always good collaborators. There's a lot of bursting through the wall, but bursting through the wall for the spotlight. And I think that very much affects the progress of the disease. Has anybody else experienced that in this community? Wendy, do you want to share or no? You have to unmute.
I am. It's been a long day of multitasking. Oh my God. And it's not even as old as you guys, as late as you guys. What were we talking about? Sorry, I just lost it there. What were we just talking about?
Collaboration versus competition.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. I think that there's just depending on which pocket you're in. Obviously, everybody is very, they take this disease to heart. And I think everybody's very sensitive just in general. I mean, people have been beat up, right? As an individual, you've been beat up, right? Our identity is always being reformed. It was broke down from the disease, and we're trying to find our niche where we are in society. And then with our community, we want to do something as a whole. And I think that there's a difficulty, to be honest, with keeping the gas on. I mean, I look at someone like Heather and I'm like, oh, how have you kept the gas on so long? Because it is so exhausting. Like the number of boulders out there that you just keep chipping away at, and we're a sick community, and I just think that sometimes it's really difficult. People throw in the towel, they want to compete, and realistically at the end of the day, the only way we're going to get things done is to come together and try to come all together, put differences aside, and be there for the big picture. This is the only way we're going to get things done.
Heather, you think more we're a community of collaboration, or we're becoming more divisive?
Well, I mean, I can see it from both sides, right? Because I'm involved in 10,000 jillion collaborations with really, really good people who care, are in it for the right reasons, have no agenda other than to move the needle for everybody and make sure that the rising tide is lifting all the boats. But then on the other side of it, there's also the major influencers who are serving nothing but their own agenda because they want to be front page. There's always going to be that going on. I don't know that there's any way around it. I know that it detracts from the effort. It makes our work that much harder. I mean, it is what it is, but there's more collaboration now than there was before, for sure, which is a good thing.
So we have a question off of Instagram. how do you make your voice heard to the doctor? And I'm sure everybody has an opinion here. We'll start with you, Amy. They've been on social media, like Eileen's research, and they are ready to advocate for themselves. How do they make themselves heard? I think the thing is, you can't always just have an endless amount of financial means to make yourself heard.
Yeah, I think sometimes we're just really trapped between a rock and a hard place, right? Because I think if the doctor doesn't want to listen to you, it's going to be really hard to make yourself heard. And I think that, we hear a lot about, of course, if we can change doctors and like get a second opinion, get a different doctor, but as we know, that's not always possible. The wait times, the money, the insurance, the access, it can be really hard not to be able to change, and you have to move forward with the doctor that you have. And I think, we see so many posts and like tips for like, okay, this is how you can advocate for yourself at the doctor. And sometimes there are, good tips. But it's also, I think it places a lot of undue burden on the patient because we don't feel good. And like we said earlier, it's like going to the doctor can be really anxiety producing. Like I used to get so scared, I couldn't even speak when I was at the doctor. And just because of all of the gaslighting, all of the ways that you are interrupted in the first, you're just like, hi, I'm Amy. And they just like automatically interrupt you. And you're like, whoa, okay, whoa. So I think, for me, something that I always try to do now is I just always try to treat a doctor's appointment kind of like a job interview. And I think that's sad that I or others have to do that, but I really pay attention to what I wear, if I can sit up straight, if I'm not in pelvic pain, if I can try to like sit up a little bit taller. I take notes. I have notes. Oftentimes I actually print something for the doctor so I can just hand the doctor just a little like condensed summary of like, this is why I'm here. This is what I'm looking for today, in case, I get to a point where I feel like if I start talking, I'm going to start crying. So then I don't want to do that because I don't want to be labeled hysterical. So I think it's this really difficult song and dance that is this huge burden on the patient. And I think there's no right or wrong way to go to the doctor, because if you don't have a doctor who's willing to be a collaborator and who's willing to listen, and again, they have a very short appointment time, so that it's not just, there are also obstacles like that they're facing to have a good appointment with you, but it's just really try to do the best you can and hope that it's well received.
Excellent advice. Christina, how do you think, someone should go about being heard, either by the doctor or being heard in society, or, you've taken a stab at this in your writing?
Yeah, I agree with Amy's strategies to be heard by a doctor. And it's true that if there's no empathy there and there's no time, the doctor is not going to be your co-investigator and be committed to listening and to trying to get to the bottom of what you are trying to convey. I think, with Eileen, we've talked a lot about bridging the divide between doctors and patients and not kind of ganging up on them and seeing also their constraints within the system. And I think for things to change, there has to be a lot of changing the narrative in terms of one-on-one appointments, but also whenever you can write open letters. There's hospital boards that are in place. I've written lots of letters to try to convey why appointments don't go well, why the patient's perspective isn't necessarily taken into account, why there's research that's not being looked into, collaborate, trying to give workshops with multidisciplinary workshops that include the patient perspective. So there's ways to be heard within an appointment. And I guess there's also ways to be heard a little bit higher up without always coming in with arms and trying to come in softer ways that don't dismiss your patient's perspectives, but also try to bridge the gap between what the physicians might be dealing with from a system perspective as well.
Yeah, I think that's amazing advice. The writing and the addressing the appointment, maybe not in the moment of the appointment, but I do want to share because it's a perspective a lot of people don't get. So I have written those letters and I've written them to hospitals, higher up, whatever. And I once got feedback that was amazing. And the person went on to take all this endometriosis training because she said, you're right. Like, what would I have done if I was the person that cut you open? Like, I couldn't have handled that, But I will say that last week a doctor called because we get all sorts of crazy calls for the Endometriosis Summit. And a patient had written them and they redacted information and they showed me the letter, and it was it actually cited the Endometriosis Summit, and it was a cutting letter. And the doctor was so upset because the system is broken and they get 15 minutes with a patient. The doctor was like, genuinely, he had never gotten anything better in medical school that taught him any different. And he didn't know where to start. And it turned out to be a therapy session for the doctor when I was trying to sell a ticket for the summit. But I think we don't realize and we shouldn't have to, when we're the patient on the other side, the system is not set up a lot of times for the doctor to achieve. Does anyone have a comment on that? I see Wendy shaking your head. Heather, any comment?
I think like,
No, I mean, I think, it's just more of what everybody has said, unfortunately the labor is usually on the patient, but I think you have to, we have these preconceived notions that the first 10 times were horrible. So the 11th time is going to be horrible also. So I think we have to see each other's humanity and also have realistic expectations as well. Which is not to say that you're a doormat, because you're not. You have the right to insist and expect dignity and respect in all settings at all times. And if that doctor isn't offering it, then you need to find one who will. But again, that speaks to the privilege of being able to find a doctor. So there's, again, all of these, multi-layered intersectional issues. And I think going in prepared with your list of questions, your research that you want to present, your citations, but also I think that you have to do your homework a little bit too up front and really kind of see, well, what is this doctor's, belief system? Does it align with my values and beliefs? Are they well informed about endometriosis? Are they moderately informed? Are they industry funded? Does that impact their treatment options? I mean, there's all sorts of nuances that you have to look at so that you can be assured that you are choosing the best person for you, if in fact you can even access care in the first place, which can be very difficult and unfortunately falls on the back of the patient.
Tracy, you had a comment. No, Wendy, go ahead.
I'm going to piggyback on what Heather said, that, it's, you have to do your research, but also, the whole spoken thing of humanity is that the doctors are dealing with a broken system, and the best we can do with having a disease that can present in a variety of ways, I think it's really important. As we know, we walk into a doctor's office and they're like, okay, I have 15 minutes. I only want one complaint today. Well, it's hard when you have one complaint because you have all these different systems that are affected. So are you going to spend it on the bowel issue, the urinary issue, the respiratory issue? What are you going to talk about? So what do? We need to be really good and advocate for ourselves, documenting it, putting it on calendars. And it's up to us now to say, doctor, I'm noticing at these times of the month, I've got all these different things going on in my body at the same time. These are what I'm experiencing. We just saved them. That one complaint is now that whole bundle of complaints that we're having. So our list is now together. And then the only thing I can hope is I tell people is ask them, could you please scan my records? If you have calendars you've kept, can you scan those and put them into my medical document? Why is that important? You hope that you have a QA system within the hospital organization that will pick charts, and randomly they pick charts and they go through those. And then they may get that chart, and that chart has your stuff you've uploaded. Did the physician make any assessment of the information that you've provided that is in there and made a conclusion to say, is there anything we need to follow up about the complaints that the patient has? We've done that in all of my PT places that I've ever practiced. And it's been a great learning experience to have independent people looking through charts and leaving questions going through there. And it can be a learning opportunity, or maybe not, but we're doing our part by being prepared.
Tracy, you remembered your point.
Yes, I did. One thing that I found empowering actually at the doctor's office is when when a doctor gaslit me and was like, I don't think that this is what's wrong with you. I said, okay, I want you to write it in my chart, like everything that you've denied or declined to provide me with. And they did, because I requested my medical file after that. Because I don't have a family doctor anymore, like I'm kind of the keeper of all my medical records. So every time I go to a new place, I end up requisitioning all my files, which speaks to the system being broken. But I mean, it helps me feel organized at least. But I just wanted to kind of go back to this talk about the system being broken. And it is broken, but like it didn't create itself and it didn't break itself. Like people did that, and people have the opportunity and the option, if only they had the will to do it and the courage to do it, to create better systems. And I think that that's why we're all here, right? Is because we're all hopeful that we can have something better. We can have a better system. And so I think it takes, when people ask me, what do I want from having written bleed? And I was like, I want to be able to collaborate with my doctors. I want to be able to talk to them and work together on the problems I have, instead of just being like the receiver of information and commentary. And so I think that, this whole idea that like you only got a 15-minute appointment, like that exists because the system is broken. It would be life-changing for so many people, not even just people with endo, but just people with all sorts of different complex and chronic illnesses, to be able to actually work with their health team to have better outcomes in their lives, and better mental health, better physical health, and all those things.
All right, we are winding down. The Endometriosis Summit is 10 days away. We end each Endo Summit live with a little bit of what you guys are looking forward to the most. So Eileen, you know what occurred to me? I'm not going to write your slide yet because I have to wait to see if I'm calling you doctor. What are you looking forward to the most about the Endometriosis Summit?
I'm looking forward to meeting all these people in person and like touching the physical forms of the people that I get to talk to in the ephemeral world so often.
Exciting. And Christina, what are you looking forward? I'm actually looking very much forward to meeting you in person, because I haven't gotten
Me
to.
too.
This is even our first Zoom, because I read all your work, and this is the first time I'm going to get to.
Thank you.
Yeah. What are you looking forward?
Yeah, what I love about Summit, because I've attended virtually for the last couple of years, is really how intense and multidisciplinary it is. So I'm really looking forward to my brain just being bombarded with all this mind-opening, pioneering perspectives. So I'm very, very excited.
Wonderful. Wendy, Wendy, Dr. Abhishek is coming in person. Is that maybe what you're looking forward to the most? That's a big thing.
Oh, he's such a great guy. I'm excited. I'm excited for everything, actually. But you know what the biggest excitement is to be in a place where you have so many people coming together and there's so many talents. And even though we've all experienced the disease differently, everybody's passionate. We're passionate about change. And even though everybody feels like crap, that's better than the other 4-letter word I was going to take. We're here together, and it feels really good. It feels like, everybody belongs, and we're here to make a difference. And so I can't wait to see everybody in person.
Heather, what are you looking forward to the most?
Well, of course, I mean, I love it every year, right? Because it's really the only endo event that really doesn't serve its own sort of self-serving platform and agenda. It's really here for the greater good. So I love coming to Summit every year. I'm particularly excited that my friend, Representative Gilchrist, is going to treat us to a look at some of the policy recommendations we have just issued, and talk a little bit about the political side of the disease and the precedent-setting work that's being done there. And hopefully on the panel, we'll delve a little bit into the national action plan that we have as well. So I'm excited.
And Amy, what are you looking forward to the most? For Amy, who will our first patient-led workshop on acceptance, what are you looking forward to the most?
Well, I am looking forward to Eileen's panel on gaslighting and endometriosis. So really looking forward to that. I'm also looking forward to the one on Sunday morning. Ooh, gonna have to catch that virtually because I don't think I'll be up yet at 8:40, but it's called Disturbing the Patriarchy, Activism, Social Movements, Menstruation, and Endometriosis. And I will say that, Heather, I did read not only your article that you wrote, which I think is called The Womb Wanders Not, but it's inside of
Not
the
an article, 10,000 word chapter.
the chapter in the
Not an article.
not an article, the long chapter, which I did read I actually read the entire Palgrave's menstruation handbook. I'm not sure what the name is. It took me like a year to read it.
Then you'll definitely want to catch Dr. Bobel at that session because
so I'm really, really looking forward to that. Anyone who hasn't, definitely check out Heather's 10,000 words on The Womb Wanders Not, as well as the Palgrave's menstruation handbook, if that kind of thing interests you, because it is absolutely fascinating. And I'm looking forward to the party on Friday night because I have a really adorable outfit that I have not worn out yet.
Oh, well, that's exciting. So anyone listening can buy tickets to that. It's not virtual, but we did get moved from Remy to Soarin', but I think Soarin's the best ride in all of Epcot, but you could still wear your outfit. It won't affect anything. Tracy, aside from it being the first place you go since your book is released, what are you looking forward to the most?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like it comes out the 21st and then the next day I fly to Orlando. Yeah, I think this is my first time at the summit, and I've never been in a room full of people who like implicitly just know without having to explain, without having to be like, okay, and this is the other thing, and like just all the complexities of endo. And like you all just know, it's like that knowing nod kind of thing. But in real life, I've been like behind a computer screen talking to everybody for 3 years. Yeah, so that's what I'm looking forward to the most. And also, like, let's be real, getting out of the snow would be great.
I know you're all from cold climates. It was like 85 degrees here today in Miami. I worked out on the deck. It was great. I did you enjoyed the snow, you people. All right. So what am I looking forward to the most? Let's see, we're going to have the authors table. And hopefully we've worked out a way to put that inside so that the authors don't have to miss the summit. We talked about the relaxation station, which Jovi is coming with Dana Bowling to really give us a safe place. I love that. I get to call Eileen doctor. I get to meet Christina. Heather and I get to form our own subgroup and perhaps just escape. We like to do that, usually in a bathroom. I get to see Wendy. There is the day after the summit, a little trip to Animal Kingdom, but most of all, I think I am interested in seeing it go off without a hitch. I'm really interested in Chris Bobel's lecture because I think much of what I think we need to throw out the construct that we're working in order to make change instead of trying to make change within the construct. So it'll be really interesting. So you'll hear Chris Bobel, and then the next speaker is Representative Gilchrist. And I think together they're really gonna drive endometriosis forward. So tickets are on sale, www.theendometriosissummit.com. Next week, we are here with Heather, who we are with next week. Do you remember? We're here.
I have an idea. It might be the Kenny. It might be Dr.
Here with Dr. Cernovo. We are talking adenomyosis because March is like half over. It's almost Adenomyosis Awareness Month.
Almost.
Yeah. And in fact, I usually am up at the summit by the Monday, but I had to have Cernovo and we were so grateful. So he is next week. And we hope you'll be here. We hope Dr. Videlli shows up for that one. And take care, everyone. Look, so much to celebrate. So much to celebrate. So much to celebrate.
Thank you so much.
It's a great summit again. Year 5.
Thank you.
Good night,
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.